Completing Grandia and now returning to its opening scene for a second time, it's given me a newfound clarity in how the story is delivered to the player, namely with a certain character in mind. But first, the opening scene is Galleon. Flickering images of a watery blue sky, stargazers reaching up as if to pluck a ripple, mystic towers popping in and out of light, a quick flash of an emerging city. A scroll of countless stars filling the sky, flying machines riding by, a return to the gazers sprouting rings as if to bloom. And then there's an ascent to doom. All spare the end, a magnificent view of wonder and creation, yet there's one that would argue.
I guess I must have dozed off. I had that dream again. The bastards, they're hounding me.
Baal, who is the main antagonist for the remainder of the game, is a rather accomplished individual himself. Oddly enough, in areas that coincide with the protagonist, Justin. But that's for later. For now, Baal is currently the general, the head of the Garlau forces, a military corps that has reached extreme heights when it comes to technology. And for the world of Grandia, that means giant metal zeppelins, skyfighters, ground tanks, a plethora of other inventions that have made Garlau a force to be reckoned with. Pun intended. Baal since has decided to use this force to accomplish one final goal: to obtain the last fragment of the Spirit Stone. Let's take a step back and rewind a little bit. Before Baal had his bad dream, it was in the Dam ruins, or way distance northeast from Parn, where a floating orb, a bit of ancient technology, lie hidden. Think of the orb as a memory deposit of the Icarian civilization, holding record of what took place an era ago. You see, the Dam ruins was left behind by the Icarians, an old culture long destroyed by a rather unknown event. So much so that some have never heard of or even believe the Icarians existed. However, the Dam ruins persist, and it is here where the Garlau forces found this visage. For Baal, it served as a blueprint for finding the stone, which up until this point had eluded him. It wasn't always like this though. Once upon a time, the Garlau forces was just considered a band of brave men, routinely protecting a young and vulnerable town called Parn, where giant fauna, orcs, even bandits would sometimes threaten the safety and survival of this town's emerging yet unsettled beginning. Baal, of course, being one of these brave men, grew up in this town, wanted to protect it, and soon would need a better way of serving this goal. So a mysterious corporation called the Jewel Foundation granted this wish with Industrial Revolution, which for Garlau meant a ton of weapons. Baal's protective ambition is what sparked the growth of the Garlau forces and, by extension, his homeland. Many of the NPCs regard Baal as a great and powerful man that rose up and protected the town. Even some of the amenities, such as the Baal Museum, are filled with all the Angeluan and Icarian artifacts lining the walls as some of the force's many achievements. There's a steamer too, a giant steamboat that takes passengers back and forth to New Parm due to growing expansion. Even the train station, although not really in use anymore, is often stated as a gift from Baal and the Jewel Foundation's enterprise, seeing as it led to the citizens no longer having to mine coal and instead can work in a factory. A lot is supposedly owed to Garlau. So, how did Baal fall? Why is he after the Spirit Stone? What is the Spirit Stone? What makes this seemingly innocuous rock so important? Yet again, it's another artifact left behind by the Icarians. It was a sort of power source for the people of Angelu to use for creating the advanced technology displayed in all of their records. As you see, their technology was great, and as an accomplished general in control of what seems to be the greatest military upstart the world has ever seen, one could always use more power. So, let's talk about that power. Near the end of Baal's nightmare, there's a mural showing a destructive force raining down lightning on a fallen Icarian, protecting depictions of humans, Mogai, and the occupants of the Mist Village. These are most of the mortal kind that exist within the world of Grandia, and at one point in time, they all lived together in Angelu instead of separate like they do now. This mural is an in-depth illustration showing the legendary end of Angelou, the power that befell it, and the sacrifice required to protect what remained. Within that subject, Gaia is the manifestation of concentrated spirit energy put inside of a spirit stone, which can then be used to perform miracles when in the hands of an Icarian. In this case, think of the spirit stone as a seed, energy being the light, hands of an Icarian being its water. Soon, a tree of life is born from this labor. The Icarians can then use this tree to create things, seemingly whatever they want. However, the legend goes, only Icarians can do this. If any of the other humanoids handle the stone in such a way, it could lead to disaster. Most of the humanoids were fine with the Icarians being the sole wielders of the Spirit Stone, but it is said that the humans' greed took hold and they began to use the stone for their own purposes. This was the first error, for instead of the winged light of the Icarians, it was greed that the stone absorbed, resulting not in a tree of life, but an agent of unmaking, a pestilent, warped, soul-sucking insect that turns life to stone. It absorbed the spirit energy around it, culminating to an eventual release of destructive power. Baal wants to recreate this event out of a misguided understanding of this legend. Project Yggdrasil, Gaia in this case, was set in motion to give birth to a new golden age by destroying the old. And to achieve this, the Baal forces are to assemble the remaining pieces of the Spirit Stone, eventually recreating the tragedy that happened long ago with the belief that this time it will remake the world. Somewhere along the lines, Parm's rising hero lived long enough to become the villain. Kinda makes sense why a dream of an ancient utopia can be flipped as a hound that haunts his ambition. So, Baal here, he's a well-made villain. The right reasons, wrong way type of villain. He started out just another citizen of Parm and grew to one of the more prominent positions, only to lose sight of why he was doing this in the first place. In my eyes, it makes him a well-crafted antagonist. I'm thinking Lloyd from Legend of Dragoon, an individual that fell for the lies he told himself. Baal was eventually stopped by the protagonist, in a way, but before then, there was also another character outside of the main protagonist that warded Baal's advance. Mullen, Baal's son, a fact learned at the start of the game, knew, or at the very least noticed, Baal's growing haphazard nature when it came to collecting the shards of the Spirit Stone. Mullen has an interesting, albeit short, backstory within the length of the narrative, and it's learned pretty late in the game. Mullen is half humanoid. The different characters, Justin, the protagonist by the way, meets throughout his journey are mostly labeled humanoid by the Baal forces. Luck Village, Gumbo, Kafou are only a few places where humanoids live, where Baal, Mullen, and maybe a small contingent of the Baal forces had visited at least once before. There is a scene where Mullen and Fina become trapped in an ancient Icarian temple underground. Here, Mullen explains to Fina his origins and viewpoint of the Icarian legend as it stands today.
In fact, that was the greatest error of the ancient Angelo civilization. Only Icarians can use the Spirit Stone. That was the law of nature. But humans forgot this and tried to create prosperity with their own hands. They began to reach for things they shouldn't touch. As a result, just as they reached the height of prosperity, they vanished. The Icarians, too.
You? Why do you know that?
My mother told me. Yes, my mother was a humanoid. Among the humanoids, hers was a very ancient and gentle race. My father, General Baal, married my mother in order to obtain the secrets of the ancient Angelo civilization.
Mullen.
I love this land that my mother loved.
Mullen, unlike Baal, has a much different reasoning as to what to do with the Spirit Stone due to his experience with the many regions he's visited up until this point. Also, for the story beat, it gives Fina, and the player for the matter, a more graspable motive as to why he pursues the Spirit Stone with such fervor, despite the fact that he outright disagrees with Baal. Mullen indeed believes the shards of the Spirit Stone should be collected, but shortly after being assembled should be destroyed to prevent any further catastrophe. He believes humans are too greedy to have access to the stone, which is pretty interesting, seeing as Baal changed throughout the narrative, growing mad due to more than a few experiments with Gaia's energy. Growing machines, turning villages to stone, creating a mutant arm, it makes sense. Mullen has a rather large assortment of soldiers incredibly loyal to him, willing to break away from Baal's ambition and destroy the stone by any means necessary, especially if things went awry with Project Idrissa. And of course, this doesn't pan out. Things definitely went out of control. Baal is successful in creating a being of unmaking, a massive monster, one filled to the brim with greed. Justin is the one that made it to the core of the beast, blessed by the spirits, and destroyed the assimilated stone, freeing the beast of its greed. However, before this victory, Justin and the party had a 1-on-4 with Baal. Cool fight, played it twice. Well, actually a few times. Baal has entirely lost his humanity. He is a human torso among a mass of alien parts. No mercy, no care, full Seymour. At the end of the fight, Baal is reduced to a human head stuck on what seems to be a tadpole out of water. Even here, his mind still warped with delusions of grandeur. A sad yet fitting end for such an artistically painted character. Grandia is an excellent RPG created by Game Arts in 1997, originally for the Sega Saturn, but now available on Switch, and I assume Switch too, seeing it's a software download. I could go on and on for hours in disjointed ramblings of Game Arts exploits and their contributions made to the gaming zeitgeist, but maybe for later. It's a good game. You should give it a try, if you don't mind a bit of a read. It contains one of my favorite archetypes of villains, one that gives the beginning, middle, and end of a story within just a few frames. Anyway, thanks for watching.